Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. On this episode, I'm excited to have my friend, Mr. Blair LaCorte. Blair, thanks for doing this.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
So, Blair, you've got so many careers, I feel like. I'm considering not going to cover it all in one episode, so people stay tuned. We're probably going to be doing this again. But Blair, as we were kind of talking earlier, so many of our listeners are founders of businesses or founders of investment funds or want to be those things. And growth is such a important thing for them. And it's what their investors are demanding of them. It's what they were looking for themselves. I would love to start going through some of the stories in your background, and maybe we could pick different companies that you've spent time with and talk about the growth story and maybe pull out some of the principles or some of the learnings that you felt like helped you the most going through that experience, if that's okay.
Sure, listen, it'd be great.
Let's talk about Internet Capital Group and providing a 100x return for investors there.
Right. Well, I would put that in the category of and by the way, I'm going to apologize up front, Jess. I mean, we know each other, so I'll say it to your users is, one of my beliefs in life is that the way you keep people alive is you talk about them every day. So I'm going to reference my dad a couple of times, I'm sure, in this podcast. But I would say Internet Capital Group is one of my classic father quotes, which is better to be lucky than smart. And, if I translated that from his generation to our generation, that doesn't mean that there wasn't reality behind it. But the Internet Capital Group was in the right place at the right time because the macro was all about, for those of you younger, what we're doing in AI back in 1999 was what everyone was talking about with the internet. It's going to change everything. And if you happen to be an internet company, and especially an internet company like Internet Capital Group, who had decided to change the venture model by only focusing on internet companies. I mean, that sounds really simple today. It wasn't simple back then. And the fact that you would actually take yourself public, which venture capital groups didn't. They were private, private capital, and that's the way they wanted to be. It was a really unique company at the time. And it had a, big impact, in 1997 through the rest of the internet. So it was a brainchild of a couple of guys in Philadelphia. I happened to join the team after I had sold my company in Colorado and to help open up the West Coast office. But Internet Capital Group was pretty simple. That you would actually go after internet-enabled companies, and that you would take a wide swath from everything from what was internet going to do to waste water management, from what was the internet going to do to vertical marketplaces and sales. And they placed a lot of bets. And the only problem that they had at the time in 1999 was they couldn't get public because none of their investments had become liquid. So we decided that we needed to take one of our companies public because that would prove to people the power of the model was inherent, and therefore you're buying a public, almost like an ETF. You're going to buy a conglomerate of all these companies that were going to be public companies. So we had a company in Horsham, outside of Philadelphia, which was called Vertical Net. Two Mikes, Mike McNulty and Big Mike, as we call them, but they had never really run a company. But they had built all these websites for different verticals to buy and sell. And so we decided that we would do two things. One is we brought in a guy, Mark Walsh, from GE, and I jumped over to help take this company public. At the time, we had pretty normal and rational expectations that we thought we could get it out. And Lehman Brothers was our banker. And they were at the time, the gold standard. We stumbled. We had to get more, this wasn't right. That wasn't right. And we finally got it public. We had $3 million of revenue. And we went public, I believe it was at like $14 a share. And we thought, oh my God. And it just dropped. It just dropped to $12 and $11. And, was this going to work or not going to work? From that day on, when we had the doubt, it went up to 60, it split. It went up to 100, it split. It went up to 300, it split. So we went from a $3 million revenue company to a $10 billion valuation. Those were the days. And what I mean by that is that, sometimes you have to actually ride the wave. I always wondered, did we go public too early? The internet crashed. Obviously, the stock went down. Internet Capital Group did survive and actually was very, very profitable over the past 20 years. Vertical Net did survive. We sold half off and we kept the other piece public, so we made it through it. But I later on, I interviewed a lot of people, and a lot of these people I interviewed for other companies knew who I was because of Vertical Net, because it was such a big story. And they always lamented. And the lament was, look, I just decided I was going to get profitable before I went public. And they missed the window. Okay. And they were broken because, all this money had gone. They were never going to get that kind of hit again. So what I would say is that sometimes, there's things you can control, things you don't control. When the macro is moving, you have to decide whether you're going to be a momentum player or not, because that was a momentum play. And we got in, we were B2B. I'm happy to say I made money. I wish I had made more when I just was about to sell a bunch more stock and, decided that I was smarter than the market, and the market, continued to go down from that point. But if you don't monetize, if you have a belief in your head that this is the way a business should be run, but you're not paying attention to the fact that the market's a momentum play, then you're going to get run over by the market. So it will giveth and it will take away. And so being in the right place at the right time is only the first thing. Being smart enough to understand what that means and to execute on it is the right thing. And did I feel bad that maybe we went public too early and we didn't deserve all of that? Of course I did. But over time, I realized that we had made a huge difference. The innovations that we did continued on. We took $400 million from Microsoft, and Alibaba and all these different places. And what you see today in marketplaces, if you go back and read the couple of chapters I wrote in the book on marketplaces back then, we actually made it happen. Now, the first generation of marketplaces, a lot of them still aren't here. Some of them are, but they drove the second, third, fourth, and fifth. So I do encourage you to always question yourself. Why are you having a hard time with something? Are you not actually looking at the reality of it? And if it's a momentum market and you decide not to play, then don't feel bad afterwards. There's my 60 seconds of wisdom from the number one IPO in 1999. And by the way, who was the number two IPO in 1999? ICG. Vertical Net number one, ICG number two. So, I got that going for me.
That's fun. It's funny for those of us not watching on video. Blair's in his office and his walls are absolutely covered with things. And Blair, I like your answer because it reminds me of the first time I came to your office there and we basically went on tour of all the things you've got there. Um,
Everything that my wife doesn't want in the house is in my office. So,
but I loved it because it was just story after story. And I think that's one of the reasons that I liked you so much from the first time we met is your intentionality, your thoughtfulness, and your the way you think about the human condition and how the irrationality of humans and the emotion of humans and the fact that they're not going to do maybe what's in their best interest or they're going to make all these emotional decisions, and so you have to be adapting to real life instead of to how we wish life was. And I want to go back to your answer here because at the kind of to your later point, it really makes me think so much about Howard Marks and his book Mastering the Market Cycle. I think I want to say Oaktree's at 180 billion or 200 billion, and now partnered with $1 trillion Brookfield. But this idea where he's really doubled down on his mentor his mentor Warren Buffett and his mentor Ben Graham about from the Intelligent Investor with thinking about the market like being partnered with a manic depressive, where your job is to know what a company is worth as a function of its cash flow. And, when the partner comes in and says, the sky is falling, everything sucks, nothing will ever get better. And is in the doldrums and the market is way down, this is the time to buy. And when he comes in and he's just like, high on a kite and just nothing could ever go wrong and thinks that everything's worth more than it actually is, that's the time to sell, and um, the honesty that like at almost all times, humans as a mass, because we're sheep and following each other around, we're typically either overdoing it or underdoing it. And so don't don't have the market tell you what something's worth. You need to know what it's worth. And then you need to wait for the market to offer you more than that as a time to sell.
Yeah, and there's something that I would put right next to that that's complementary, which is, look, our brain is designed to take complexity and bring it into simplicity. It's designed to have our neural pathways become more efficient every day. The reason why you need muscle confusion and working out is because working out isn't about burning calories. Working out is being more efficient and burning less calories, right? Your body's thinking, I may not get my next meal. And when you look at that, you have to actually step back and say, we have two things that happen to us. One is our amygdala is always looking for fear, right? And the second is we're always looking for love because that calms our parasympathetic nervous system, makes our body more efficient. So survival and efficiency are how we are wired. And so the problem with that is that we actually want to believe that we can control those two things, that we can eliminate all risk, and that we can, if we do the right things, be really happy. Like that's just going to come to us because we're a good person and we did the right things and I followed the plan. And neither of those two things are true. You can't avoid risk, and there will be bad things that happen to good people. And you have to be able to survive those, hopefully. And, to find, love and happiness is in essence if you really look at the neuroscience of it, is the essence of finding calmness. It isn't about finding happiness, it's finding calmness, which allows you to feel happy because you have a moment to realize that you're alive. And that sounds pretty technical, but what it comes down to is that just like a real estate developer, if you take too much risk and the market turns, you're going to lose your building, right? So where are you going to stand if you know that you're not totally in control? How far are you going to lean? And when are you going to lean? And when are you going to be aware of that? So if you decide to take a risk and you decide to go out on the edge and you fail, you're not a failure. That was something you did, and that's the control you have. The control isn't the outcome. The control is the decision making and the learning. And if you look at it that way, then you're always winning as long as you're not dying, right? Just like a scientist. Well, I learned something from that. And, I was a jerk. And the next time I have a relationship, I'm going to figure out how to do it a little bit better. And that is, I think the way that we talked about growth, that's the way that humans grow. And that's the way that companies grow. So one thing is that, again, let's be honest about this control thing. We don't have any control. I used to do a thing at TPG when, a lot of my partners were, the top investors in the world. I mean, we bought some of the biggest companies. We did some of the biggest turnarounds, and they were really good at what they did, finding companies, executing. But sometimes you had to actually go off to the side and spend a bunch of time with the teams and come up with an opinion. And that kind of fell to me in a lot of cases. And one of the things I would do with these CEOs or these exec teams from big companies, we bought Neiman Marcus, we bought IBM, we bought Burger King. These people had become the pinnacles, right, of their careers, was to sit down and say, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to actually go back 10 years and I want you to tell me about where you were 10 years ago. And then I want you to strip out your family, some structural things. And I want you to tell me, are the things you enjoy, the things you worry about, and the people you're hanging out with, can you figure out where you are today and how you got there? And the reality is you can't. Most of the people in your life are going to be changed over a 10-year period. You had kids and now you hang out with it. And so this whole concept that we have that we're going to be able to control everything, what we can control is the experience we have and how they make us a different person. And then how we re-engage with those things when we want to. Because you have a friend, you haven't seen him in a while because you don't play basketball anymore. Dude, if you want to see him, you have to proactively go out and do that, which means you have to have the consciousness that that person made me happy and I miss them, right? And not be driven by what's happening every day in life. So, I mean, that's again, I'm going back to philosophy, but that's the ability to decide, what we're here for is to manage life and to grow, but it's not to control life.
Well, I like that you went to philosophy. I look at the most financially successful entrepreneurs, investors in the world. And if you spend a lot of time listening to their talks and if they go on a podcast, you read their books, like these people are steeped in philosophy and they have different ones. But, I'm glad you brought up the concept of a wave. I think about it, I think about stoicism this way. I'm a snowboarder from Canada who moved to Huntington Beach and was on a mergers and acquisition team for Citi. But really, I was down there so I could surf every morning before work, right? And there's this concept that like you're not going to change the wave. The wave is the wave. Sometimes in Huntington Beach it's knee height, and sometimes they like every once in a while like hits the bottom of the pier. I mean, they get to be like really big waves every once in a while. People don't always think about that for California. You are not going to change the wave. You can complain about it, you can whatever you want, you can try to predict it, but it's going to be what it's going to be, which is outside your control. Market goes up, market goes down, interest rates change, whatever, right? Um, but you can do all sorts of things to master skill sets of what you're going to do about that wave. You can do the push-ups, you can have the shoulder muscles to position yourself. You can spend the hours it takes to read the ocean and go like, oh, that wave's going to form this way, this one's going to form that way. And you've got all these options to where you're going to paddle, how hard you're going to paddle. Am I going to get crushed by this one? What should I do about it? Kind of thing. And so this realism of like, the most powerful part here is the wave, and I'm not going to change that. However, I have eminent control over certain things, right? And so, you think about like Warren Buffett, arguably the, you know, most successful investor in the history of the world. And he spends so much time thinking and very little time executing. When he talks about the effect of Berkshire Hathaway by getting into Coca-Cola, it's in some ways it's a very simple act that he did once, and he's not even like doing the work after that point. These people that say like the only way to be successful is hard work. It's the most common way, but it's not the only way. Sometimes people do it through hard thinking. And you think about what you brought up about this idea of at that time, like going in, striking hard, choosing the internet at the expense of others, like, saying we're not going to do anything else, cutting the other options off and saying like we are going all in on the internet when the rest of the sheep were not, like being contrarian and correct, right? Um, and you think about just like what an incredible tailwind that was for you, and how for the rest of us, like we've constantly been told the answer is always hard work and then more hard work. And yes, they say strategy and have a good team and these other things, but really the message we get so often is hard work, hard work, hard work, where sometimes it's hard thinking and, you know, choosing to position yourself right for the wave before everyone else and being the one to if you surf pipeline in Hawaii, you know, being in the right position where you're deepest in the wave means nobody else is allowed to get on it. They call it snaking if you do, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that is more valuable than working 16-hour days, 7 days a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so I want
and
you to weigh in
I
on this and tell me if you see it differently or
yeah,
similar
no,
or
I love what you're saying, and I hope your listeners this is useful, because this to me is the core of the of being a human athlete, right? Which is at the end of the day, we may not control the wave. Like I'll give you one extreme is the best deal you ever did was the deal you didn't do, right? Which is a lot of us get in the mode and we just ride the wave because the wave's there, and that's not the wave we should pick, right? It's hard not to pick it because you don't know if another one's coming. Right. But when you're trying to decide what to do something and how to do it, first step is get the right wave. I'm lucky. The second step is to know you have the right wave. I'm going to work hard. I would argue that most people who make money aren't the people who work really hard. Einstein had a great quote. If I had a minute, I'd take 59 seconds to think about the problem and 1 minute to solve it. Right. Same kind of philosophy is that, yes, hard work is really important, but it's only important when you're in the right groove, right? You can work really hard and you can be really tough and you can stay with a business for 5 years, which again, back to my analogy, these guys who were broken guys who came looking for a job from me. Oh my God, I stayed with it and I never, I did the right stuff and I worked really hard, but I never made it. Winners need to win. Culture is nothing without winning. We need to move forward. Now, winning doesn't always have about making money, but it has to feel like we're not just working hard. We're either learning or we're earning. So if you're learning, that's fine. And if you're earning, that's fine. And if you can learn and earn at the same time, dude, we're in the right wave at the right time. and smile, right?
So,
So
so my
I do
question,
think,
I
yep,
want to
sure,
interrupt on that
sure,
because again, as we've gotten to know each other, like what I really want listeners to get from today is like what's going on inside Blair's brain. Okay. So at that point, I'm interested, like, what your decision tree looks like. And again, when not everyone else sees what you've seen yet because they haven't done the hard thinking you've done, which is actually why the opportunity is there, is because it's not crowded yet. Like there can be so much self-doubt. There's the pain of the times we were wrong in the past and we crashed and burned and the wave held us under and it really sucked and we questioned our value as a human being or whatever, right? So there's the fear, there's the excitement, there's the criticism is so much worse when you make a mistake that no one else thought was a good idea than if you make a mistake that everyone else thought was a good idea, right? So like,
right.
can you help
Yeah.
me through your decision making tree at that point when you're like, wow, I see something that everyone else hasn't seen, but it feels like there's a lot of jeopardy if I'm wrong, and the courage or the go no go or what that decision tree looks like.
Sure. And I'll give you an example in that same vein with Vertical Net. We had, we were masters of the universe. Back then, even though we were an internet company, you'd run out and get the Wall Street Journal and see, what did we announce today, and did the stock move? It was crazy. It's like AI is today, right? You were just running as fast as you could. At one point, I remember sitting in my office and I had put in a sell order for some more stock. I had made some money and made a lot of money, made more money than I ever thought. And so I didn't need money, but I thought, I should sell some more stock. And I put a sell order in at 60. And the broker called up and he said, hey, listen, it's at 59 and a half. The market's going to close in 10 minutes. And I remember thinking at that moment, he's trying to screw me, right? Because he knows I come from a poor, background, and I'm not going to be this unsophisticated investor. And I said, don't worry about it. I got money in the bank. This is no problem. Let it ride. It was at 59 and a half. Went to 52, went to 49, went to 30, went to 20, went to 10, went to 6, went to 2, went to $1. Okay. And every time it went down, I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to be a guppy. I'm not going to sell right now. Now, why did I do that? That was moronic, right? Why was I trying to prove to him that I wasn't? Because a lot of times the decisions we're making have a lot more to do with our subconscious than they do with our conscious. And I had a chip on my shoulder because I didn't really understand this world I was in, and I had gotten lucky. Now I worked really hard for it, and I watched that stock go down. And I learned that lesson about asking myself, why are you doing things? We process 17 million bits of information a second. We take in about 150 bits. Okay, so which 150 bits do we take in that we're making conscious decisions on? Well, it tends to be driven by two main factors. One is fear. I'm making a decision because there's big risk here. And the second is confirmation bias, which is I see this pattern. I understand this pattern. I'm looking for this pattern. That's why sometimes when you're thinking about something, you flip through a book, you go, oh, look at that chapter. That's exactly what I was looking for, where you would have missed it if you hadn't actually already believed that. So, how do you get around this processing of 150 bits? There's a thing, and you're going to have to cut me off again, but there's a thing called the Johari window. Now, I'm married to a psychotherapist, so I have a little bit of scar tissue around this. But for those of you who don't know what the Johari window is, it's something you learn in first year psychology, but it's something that's in business every single day because business is just math and human psychology. That's all it is. Math, how things add up, and human psychology, why people buy, why they sell, why they do things, what they need. And the Johari window says that you have a public image, it's the top left. You show who you are, and the world knows that about you. Now, sometimes people, I'll call it embellishment from Blair. Sometimes you present things that are a little more than you are, and you got to be careful of that. But theoretically, the Johari window is you go to my LinkedIn and you look at me and go, oh, I have an impression of this guy. I like him. I don't like him. He's kind of my kind of tribal guy. Well, there's two vectors to grow that window. And the reason that window is important is because, to your point, the reason you do things is because you get things to your consciousness where you can actually decide whether you're doing something right or wrong and your subconscious isn't driving it. The first is vulnerability. Are there people in your life who you tell more than your public image? even if it's bad things about you, so you grow. And are you vulnerable? The second is you have people in your life who will tell you your blind spots. And they'll say, dude, you got drunk and you were really mean to that person. Why? And then you have to ask yourself, why was I doing that? Right? Those two things expand your window because they show you what your subconscious is doing. So I would say that the most powerful thing in life, the biggest issue, of mental illness under 25 is loneliness, and that basically is about the Johari window connecting with the world. The number one killer over 65 is loneliness, the Johari window, and the number one reason in between those two that you do dysfunctional things is a Johari window. So it all starts with, do you know yourself, and do you have people who know you, and are you going to listen to them? And that's the way you get better at business. Dunbar's number is 150 people you connect with emotionally, given the size of your neurocortex of your brain. A lot of people built their companies around this, this Dunbar's number. But I would argue that Dunbar's number in business is about not necessarily showing everything, but showing enough that you're vulnerable enough that people will actually disagree with you and help you grow and make better decisions. Because again, why do you make these decisions? A lot of it has to do with things you're not thinking about, that you're trying to prove to your dad that, you're better than he is. Right. That's a cliche, but it's true. And you got to get over that shit because every parent is waiting for their kids to say thank you, waiting. Thank you for all your sacrifices. And every kid deep down is going, well, I'm waiting for them to apologize because that could have been better. This could have been better. And at a certain point in life, when you just come to it, we're all just people and we all made mistakes. But if we're not growing, we're dying.
So I really want to talk about, TPG, I think today, like 260 billion, and the time that you were there, the fund 4X, the group that you were with. But before we do that, I want to talk about vertical net for one more minute.
Sure.
I think about this human condition that you talk about and the unfair advantage. It's like Warren and Charlie say, like, the number one skill for an investor is not math, it's emotional control. And, this kind of like, they talk so much about radical
Now,
self-honesty
I
and
would argue it's
understanding.
both of them, but I agree that most people think about the math and they don't think about the emotional
Oh,
control.
I don't think it's an either or.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do it without the math. I mean, you
Right.
just say,
Right.
what's the lead is like not having everybody else's fear or over optimism be contagious and think for yourself. Right. But also there's so much about getting away from self-deception and getting to a place of radical self-honesty and objectivity about ourselves and others. And, business, I've had so many people who built billion-dollar businesses like yourself on the show, and they so often talk about the role of sales in entrepreneurship and growing a business and fundraising. And one thing I want to talk about on Vertical Net before we move off is this idea of like understanding other humans and what they say versus what might be motivating them, what I said and what's motivating me and what I should say next instead. And like, let's talk about, previous to the $10 billion valuation of Vertical Net, securing this pipe from Microsoft for $400 million. I mean, in 1999, Microsoft was the open AI. Well, I guess Microsoft is back to being Microsoft again now, right? But I mean, Microsoft is such a behemoth. Like, when you think about that process of understanding the humans and having them come to the conclusion that they wanted to write a, private investment
Yeah.
into public equity,
It's
right?
it's actually it's a great question. I mean, it's obscure, but it's a great question because I look back on it now. I mean, sometimes you don't know in the moment what you're doing. It's the classic. When you're in the zone, a lot of the things that the basics you're not thinking about because you're doing them right, and then you're just focused on the higher level thing. At the end of the day, I had winners or survivors guilt for a long time. Like you can tell, like, because there were a lot of people got mad at me when we made a lot of money. People like to say he's a great guy. I'm so glad that he made a lot of money. But unfortunately, and I'm going to diverge just a tiny bit because I want you to understand how powerful this subconscious is. One of the things built into our amygdala for survival is social comparison. And it ties into that whole Dunbar's number thing of I can connect with my tribe. Social comparison is all about I don't want to be the worst in my tribe because I'm going to get kicked out or they're going to kill me, right? And so you're always processing in the background how you're comparing your worth to other people. And an easy way to do it is how much money you make, because that's what people tell you is that's your worth, right? Is how much money you make. And so when I started to make money, it also made other people uncomfortable and also got me, you know, some people didn't like me, and I didn't like that because I want people to like me, right? So when you look at it in that context, you got to be really careful. Now, the flip side to that is the question you asked me is how did we get that deal done? And by the way, that was the largest investment Microsoft had ever made outside of the cable investments they had made, the telecommunications investments, right? And it was huge, right? And especially in the internet time when you know, those kind of things moved your stock. It doubled our stock, right? And the reason that we got the deal done is because, business is just like love. It's about alignment. And at the time, we had found a group, Biz Central, and we had actually looked at what they were doing, and they had an issue. They had a chip on their shoulder. Yahoo Marketplaces and Alibaba were doing a lot more business stuff. And it turns out that Alibaba had come to us and said, could we use some of your technology and make an investment in you? And at the time, although I was the head of strategy, I didn't actually understand that, right? It was, and so much stuff was happening, but I did understand that it was important. And so we happened to mention to people in the meeting that had happened. At that moment in time, we activated a fear, and that fear grew over time about what you don't know, what you do. So when you really come down to the basics of why they did that deal, did we have good technology? Did we have good brand name? Were we the biggest marketplace? Of course we were, but they had a need and we were aligned at that moment in time. And we needed money and they needed to make a statement that they were going to get into business marketplaces. And this could be the base of it. And it grew from there because it's sometimes easier in a big company than it is in a small company. Because in a small company, you end up starting with emotion and you end up ending with the emotional climax. In a big company, you end up getting a few people emotionally involved. But once it starts moving and once people start doing math and putting together models, it actually has a weight unto itself, right? Where they want to get it done because, yeah, we're working on this and we can get this thing done. And that was counterintuitive to me, that it was some ways easier to get a deal done with a big company for a bigger amount of money than it was with a small company for a smaller amount of money. But that has to do with the way humans process complexity. The bigger it was, the more they simplified it, and it was a black or white decision, not an emotional decision. So again, was that skill? I hope it was, because I got a little thing. It was a trophy they gave me called Sweet Deal Award. I actually didn't even get a bonus for that because we were all making so much money on the stock. I don't think anyone thought, "Ooh, Blair should get a bonus," right? But I got this little jug. It was
I mean, here's my premise, and you can disagree with me, is like, yes, it was skill, and no, it wasn't skill, because it was the wave and you were surfing it. Like, they had their needs, it was the right timing, you had technology, they were concerned about Alibaba. There's all these things that were the wave. And then there was the surfer of bringing up Alibaba, knowing the right thing to say at the right time, reading them, being personable enough that they actually want to do business with you. And that's surfing the wave. This is my
understanding
premise.
what made the person that I was dealing with successful. This is again one of these things that sounds so simple that no one believes it's really advice. But again, with my dad, who was a recruiter, look, at the end of the day, it's not about you. You want to project all what you think the reasons that you should do this. But if you don't understand why they should do it, they had nothing to do with us. It had to do with Yahoo and Alibaba. So if you don't understand why someone else is doing it, then you're missing the point. And like I just told my son, my son started in a new job, and I said, he goes, well, this and that, and this isn't, fair. And I'm worked 13 hours yesterday. I said, look, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm doing this. I'm an analyst, and I'm putting together things and models and stuff like that. I said, no, 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 no. You are, excuse the fun, you're whale shit. You're in there because they're not making money off of you today. They're training you. And little whale shit, the most important person is the person that you work for. How are you making them successful? And if making them successful is, getting them coffee, if making them successful is being there earlier and giving them some positive reinforcement, if making them successful is taking them out of a meeting, which would have wasted their time, and you go take notes there, then think about it through the lens of the person that you need, your partner, who you need to be successful. And ultimately, you will be successful because the more they are, they will invest in you. But the most powerful thing in the world is a dyadic relationship, which is a one on one relationship, which means why are they connected to you? Yes, you have a job and you have a description and you're part of a company. And those things are all powerful, right? But the most powerful thing is that one on one relationship. And I will argue with you that the first couple of jobs you have and how you learn how to do those will affect your entire career, because those are the people who will say, I need to do something extra because I appreciate that person and I like them. Right. So let's stop confusing this. We are, it's about math and human psychology. And to your point, the math is clearly obvious. But if it was business was all about math, then the smartest guys would be the richest. And if business was all about working hard, the toughest people would be the richest. And in reality, business is an apprentice sport. I went to business school and I went to a training program, but business is about what you learn, both positive and negative, from the people you interact with on a day-to-day basis. And even in the world of AI, it's still about people and where to apply AI, right? And why and how to do it and what's going to play out. And, how do you bond with the people you need? And the second we forget that, then yeah, you're right. Your job's an AI job. You're being eliminated. If it isn't about human relationship, then your job it can be eliminated.
You know, I love so much of what you said. I think about these like kind of like extreme 80-20 principle, power law distribution, where there's, most things have about the same result, and then some things have a bigger result. And then every once in a while, there's something that has an absurdly high result, from small effort. And, you know, you talk about AI, and obviously with Kleiner Perkins, you've heard of AI, which is AEYE, like an eye, LiDAR for
Best
cars,
name ever.
IPO, $1.5 billion, 25 bagger for those for investors. CEO at ExoJet selling to VistaJet for over $250 million. But I want to go back to TPG, and obviously today over 250 billion. And this idea of fund valuation growth 4x during your tenure. Um, when you think about maybe one of the principles that was had a drastically outsized return for the effort at your time at TPG, what's one that comes to mind?
Sure. And out of homage, and I really say this truthfully, I'll give you three stories, but it's really not about me. It's about how the leadership actually process things. Because again, when you're one of the top three firms in the world, you can fall a prey to confirmation bias. Keep doing what you're doing because you're making money. And if you slow down, someone else is going to catch up with you. So the first was when I was brought in, I mean, I got, again, lucky. Why did I get lucky? Because I had uh, we one of our companies was a defense company. We spun out Savvy Technologies. We were turning it into a. This wasn't a TPG. This was the company before, and then we were turning it into a commercial logistics company. And then Afghanistan happened. We got heavily involved in that. We turned back into a DoD company because, in essence, DoD is all about logistics, as you saw with the Russian failed invasion. And so heavily involved in Afghanistan and Iraq, and got really burnt out. So I took some time off, and first time in my life, I took 6 months off, walked the dog every day. And TPG had a venture fund, and they would call me and say, hey, listen, we got this company. Do you want to be CEO? Do you have this company you want to be CEO? The third time, I said, no, it's really not for me. Now, in reality, I was just burnt out, but they were I don't know, I thoughtful enough to say, what do you really want to do? And they ended up offering me a job in their venture fund. Now, most people don't realize TPG had a venture fund, but almost every private equity firm was watching the venture world saying, those guys are making too much money. Let me put partners' money into this thing. It sounds like a good idea. We have a lot of money. We have a lot of influence. And so when I got in the venture fund and there was a partner there running it and we were talking, one of the things that we came to the conclusion of after 6 months was we shouldn't be in the venture business. Every time we have 3 investment committees, just like all of our investments, it takes too long. They were uncomfortable. There's no revenue. And so we had to go to the management and say, look, we should get out of the venture business. But the business we should be in is the growth business. And the growth business is the fund you were talking about. where we're going to do mid-size investments where we started, but TPG's bigger now. We're doing massive investments, but we're not doing the little ones anymore. So let's actually close down the venture fund and let's start up the growth fund. The management came back and said, absolutely. Now they could have said, no, 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 TPG's never going to fail, right? Sure.
I want to applaud you about this again, because this goes back to like thinking hard. Like there's this German proverb, why run fast if you don't know if you're on the right road? Okay.
Yep.
That decision is actually what I want to drill down into a little bit. And for everybody not familiar with growth funds, this is like late stage VC when they're getting ready to go public, or things like this when they're in revenue, Series D, Series E kind of stuff. Is that what we're talking about, Blair?
It is, except for the fact that what we meant by growth fund was a private equity growth fund. And this actually led to a really interesting issue, which is we said, venture, we're not better than the venture guys at this, and we can't move as fast. We want to do growth level, which is mid-size. We want to grow companies, but we don't want to do venture growth because that's very different. It's very passive. We want to do PE growth. And so we wanted to call it a growth fund, but we couldn't. So Coulter came in, the CEO came in, he said, and I was grappling with this. I'm like, it's really not a growth fund. And he said, we're going to call it STAR, right? And this is going to sound very trite, but I want you to understand the significance of this. He said, you're called the STAR Fund now. I said, what's the STAR Fund? He goes, Strategic Transactions with Allied Resources. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, what you keep telling me is that our real distinctive competence would be that I can actually go to Burger King and ask their opinion to analyze this company. And I can go to Neiman Marcus and do this. And I can do deals with all of these big companies. And we have CEOs that are luminaries because we've run companies for us. What you're really saying is you can be better at mid investing, not because you have the money, but because you have a network of people and companies that will help you get the deal. When someone comes to you, you're not going to lose it to a venture company or a growth fund. They're going to say, dude, these guys understand my industry, and they can hook me up with advisors and board members and CEOs. And so if you actually Google the growth fund, the TPG growth fund, and you Google and find the legal documents, and you can find it on the internet, everything on there says STAR. Now, immediately after we raised the money, now, again, even with Allied Research, I want you to think about the creativity that we used. We kept saying, sorry, go ahead.
How much did you raise to begin with?
$1.2 billion
Yeah.
in less than 6 months. But the way we did it, when he said that to me, I thought, strategic transactions with Allied Resources, it's one thing to source and it's another thing to grow. But I wonder if we can raise money that way. So I went and I said, who's visiting today? Who's going to the capital fund? Because all of these investors are always in. Could we ask them, would they like to come down the floor underneath and spend an hour with us? So rather than go out on a fundraising tour, we just said, hey, do you want to look at a smaller fund so you can add to your thing? And we raised all the money. And so that strategic, it was thinking to ourselves, how do we be different?
Okay. This is what I want to ask about, because again, this is nothing against hard work. Hard work is often so needed. But hard work on the right thing. And like, there's people that need to get off the couch. Those people need to learn and work hard. The kind of people who get on this show, the kind of people that you and I hang out with at R360. By the way, I think we're going to get a shout out to Charlie Garcia and Barbara Gustine and Michael Cole for building such a great organization.
Yeah, we're part of the same family office group for those out there called R360, which is a group of unbelievably great people. It's basically a tribe. So
yeah,
I shout out.
I feel so lucky that they let me become the Pacific chapter chair and that you and I get to hang out all the time. So, but what I want to say is this: I want to talk about this concept of not just working hard. Of like, well, yes, we have all these venture problems, but we're already going, so let's work hard at it, and we'll try to make up for our inadequacies or something.
Yeah,
and saying like the hard decision of like, let's get out. Well, a lot of times, like the big boss or somebody else is like, they don't want their judgments called into question of whoever said we should get into it, or there's a lot of inherent risk of saying like, the whole team is going this direction. I want to stop the train and reverse the train and go like take a right turn somewhere else.
Right. And your instinct is exactly right. Number one, all the people in the group, our group, you're going to lose your job if you're not right, because you're basically saying this model isn't working. There's 1,600 venture firms out there. They all continue to say they're in the top quartile. We're not making any money. We're just elongating this stuff. Working harder is stupid. We don't have an advantage. And there's also from the people at the top, this isn't a lot of money, but closing down a fund makes me look bad, right? You're exactly right. You had to make that decision. And then for Coulter to come down and get involved in it and say, dude, what you're really saying you want to do is this, and coming up with that name, that concept, strategic transactions, but use our allied resources, really changed the way we thought about it. And it was a new business model.
So I want to talk about the courage, the hard thinking, the, like it's basically like, hey, cutting down these trees with axes is really taking a long time. And spending time to think up what could be our chainsaw. And a lot of people would rather keep whacking away with the axe. Can you talk about what
Right.
that process was like for you?
Look, it's, again, I'm not saying that it's genius. I'm saying it's mindset, right? If your job is to cut down trees, then you're going to try to be better at cutting down trees. If your job is to figure out what the best use of that land is, then you're going to step back from it and say, is cutting down trees the right use of that land? And again, it comes back to confirmation bias, right? Number one, our neurons are all focused on this and we're trying to compete and we don't want to say we failed. But failure, again, a scientist would say, that's not working. Let me test something new, right? But it's really hard to do that because we attach it to our ego. But at the end of the day, if our ego was learning, like I'm proud of the fact that we said we learned faster than the rest of these venture guys who have zombie funds, and it wouldn't be a waste of my time, But I want to give you one more example because I know we're going to run out of time, and this is again my homage to TPG thinking. So when 2008 hit, it's not like we didn't know that there was going to be a problem, right? When we bought Burger King, we bought it. We took some debt and we bought it by equity. 6 months into it, they came back and refinanced all our equity out. We owned it for zero, and we invented a thing called a PIK, payment in kind. That even if we couldn't pay our interest on the loan, we could pay it with stock. We'll never lose the company. I can buy a company for free, and I can never lose it. We should keep buying companies. But we actually sat down and said, this is insane. When we went for our last deal, I won't say what the name of the company is because but we went, the banker didn't even send the loan officer. They only sent the guy who was trading the derivative, right? He was going to collect, they were syndicating. The syndication guy came and said, I can get rid of this in 2 weeks. They weren't planning on holding the loan. At that moment, we had to look at that and say, this is unbelievable. We're able to buy companies and get loans very easily, and we're able to get our equity back. But there's something wrong with this system when they're not even sending a loan officer, right? They're going to sell it before, within a week to 2 weeks, right? And so we started to get very, very nervous and we pulled back on our investments. When it hit, it was like a nuclear bomb. Even though we knew it was coming, it was 2008 was like a nuclear bomb. Everyone around the table is an equity investor, and all of a sudden, everything had gone to hell, and we can't take out loans, and we can't do this. What do we do with this thing? And I remember we're sitting around the table, and Bonderman, again, another amazing guy, and Coulter were talking, and they said, okay, let's take a deep breath, okay? And let's decide for every yin, there's a yang, and for every strategy, there's a counter strategy. What would you do right now? We talked about it, and then he did something really, really amazing. I won't tell you what we said. We came up with a hypothesis, and he brought a bunch of the associates in. Now, for those of you who know private equity, associates make a lot of money, right? And we'd been in an upcycle for 15 years. So you're an equity analyst. You're making $300,000 a year. You're getting a piece of carry. You're in your 20s. You have reached the pinnacle. Men want to be you and women want to marry you. Okay. It is unbelievable. So he brings them in, a bunch of them, the top guys in the room, and he says, listen to me. We got a problem. We're not going to be investing in equity. So I want to raise the hands. Anyone who wants to work on real estate, because real estate's going to crash, and anyone who wants to work on debt, because you can buy debt really cheaply. And out of the 25 people, only a few of them raised their hand because I'm not going to not be in equity. Those people are junk because in the cycle before that, real estate was okay, but it wasn't being an equity analyst in a private equity firm. And debt was like, you're a scum, right? And so a few of them raised their hand. They left the room. He said, we're changing our strategy. Get rid of all those other analysts. We don't need them anymore. The people who want to be part of the firm know where the cycle's going. We made $9 billion on real estate. we couldn't hire partners to do real estate to figure out what was the right thing to buy, but we had a lot of money. So what we did is we went to the banks and said, give me 25% of your portfolio. It's like buying a grab bag. It's like buying one of those Amazon boxes. I know there's good stuff in here, and then we'll hire people to go through it, right? So we partnered with Colony, and we went and bought all this stuff, made $9 billion on it. On the debt, like things like Caesars and Bally's, we owned 32 casinos. They were getting crushed, right? What did we do? Who knows the debt of our casino more than me? We bought the debt at 22 cents on the dollar. We figured out that we had either had debt in some of the biggest companies because we had bought them, or we had looked at those deals and analyzed the companies and understood the debt. We went out and bought debt, and we made money when Caesars eventually, unfortunately, had to go bankrupt. We made money on the debt that recovered most of the money that we had made on the equity, and we had spun out some of the online sports gaming. And so what was that about? It was about thinking differently. It was about having the confidence to say, I didn't control this, but I'm here today. And that's what I would argue with people. There's an old Chinese curse, good news, bad news, who's to say, right? This bad thing happened. It could turn out to be good if I'm really honest with myself that it's happening and I need to decide what to do. And one end of the spectrum, that's declare bankruptcy and move on. On the other end of the spectrum, it's lean in because I know something that other people don't know, that, you know what, I just have to get my ego over it. And those are the kind of things that impress me the most when you're talking about who impacted you in your life, is that TPG was a place where we had this rule that we invented the phrase no asshole. You couldn't even get an interview unless you knew someone in TPG. So you had to get to know someone, because the next step was, if everyone didn't agree that I'd travel with this person, doesn't matter how smart they are, even if they're smarter. And we turn down some smart people. If they're assholes, they bring the whole team down. 10% across the whole team is a negative trade against 20% smarter for the individual person, right? So again, I'm going to end with where you started, which is, dude, this is about math and human psychology. How do we get together as a tribe? And business is just this tribe that we put together to accomplish a goal. And we go, and hopefully we have a family that we go back to. That's the tribe that is really important to us. But it's what gives us purpose, and allows us to take care of our family. So never lose sight of the fact that you are not, you are not the business, but you are how you run your business.
I think that's a mic drop. I love it. Um, if people want to follow you online, if they want to connect with you, what's the website? Is LinkedIn the best place? What about these things?
Sure. Listen, if you have a question and it takes less than 5 minutes for me to hook you up with someone or answer something, I love, my dad would say random acts of kindness, but just being a good person. You can find me on LinkedIn. We have a coaching group. It's called PPE Mastermind. You can go up there and look at some of the stuff we're doing. And if you want to, we put up the videos and stuff like that. You're welcome to partake in any of it. But thank you, Jess. We got to hang out, which is, again, you have to find ways to hang out with the people that you want. So thank you for letting me hang out with you today.
Yeah. Well, we didn't get to talk about your mastermind group. We didn't get to talk your time on like the premier longevity institution in the world, the Buck Institute, which I know you're headed to a meeting in like 30 seconds for. But you're doing a lot of exciting things, and appreciate what you shared today.
Well, I'll try to live long enough that I come back on your cycle, that I can get back on. But I look forward to spending some time. I think either in August and September we have two chances to hang out.
I love it. Okay, thanks. Bye, everyone.
All right. Take care.